mathematics, and his mother, quite exasperated, felt that she had to do something drastic, so she removed him from the public school system. She enrolled him in the local Catholic school because they had a reputation for having the finest math program in their district. And after going to school, he would come home every day, he would grab something quickly from the table, he would head straight to his bedroom, and he would work on his math. And this was a ritual the entire 6-week grading period. After 6 weeks were up, the report cards came home. The mother, with great fear and trepidation, took the envelope, and somewhat like a contestant at a game show, she opened it, and to her utter amazement, she saw he had an A+ in math. I mean, she was thrilled. She was absolutely ecstatic. And so she called him down and she said, "Jimmy, I am so proud of you. I'm so excited. This is wonderful." And she said to him, "But I want to know, what made this change? What happened in a mere 6-week period? You went from being an E student in math, a perpetual E student in math, and then you have not only an A, but an A+ in mathematics." And his response to her was this. He said, "Mommy, it really was quite simple." He said, "The day we went to that Catholic school and we went into that classroom," and he said, "when I saw that they had pinned that fellow to that plus sign," he said, "I knew they meant business here." Well, I think it's time for us to start meaning business. This whole business about what's happening to our young people and what's happening to our youth in our state and in this nation. And I'm going to share what I believe to be what the problem is. And then I'm going to try to postulate some real solutions because I don't think you have the right to complain very loudly unless you're at least postulating some solutions and you've done something to demonstrate the change can occur. The United States of America is somewhat in a state of free fall. And I think that our future is in great peril. When you consider the fact that we have 2.2 million people that are incarcerated, that's the most incarcerated nation in the world in all of history. And we are free people. We have more people incarcerated than what they incarcerated in the Soviet Union or any other country. I believe that the pathology of a nation, it manifests itself in its criminal justice system, in its inability to get its citizens to buy into the high ideals, the transcendent vision that it might have. And therefore you start losing people who literally opt out of participating in the real world of productivity and of success. And then you create an entire industry around housing people in the prison industrial complex. Most Americans don't know that every day in the United States of America, there are 130 juveniles that are in detention centers or incarceration facilities on any given day, and it's not the same 130,000 from day to day, because the juvenile population, it is very, very fluid in the juvenile justice system. Most people don't know that we have somewhere, it's estimated, between 5 to 7 million children who have a parent or parents that are incarcerated. And the #1 predictor, according to the United States Justice Department, that an individual will be incarcerated is to have an incarcerated parent or parent. It is the #1 predictor. According to this latest data released by the Justice Department, 70% of all children with an incarcerated parent will end up incarcerated themselves. If that's the case, we're looking at 5.3 million children that are moving toward the prison industrial complex. It retreads itself over time. The invisible young people in our community are those kids who are in foster care and who are in the juvenile justice system. Over 500,000 young people in the United States are in the foster care system. And it's just a real crisis that few people are talking about. You know, I've written a paper from the prison yard, from the schoolyard to the prison yard. As you see this march from the schoolyard, and with amazing accuracy, we can really predict who's going to go to the penitentiary. All you have to do is go to a public school, an elementary school, and go to the special education class and be introduced to those who've been labeled mild mentally impaired, educamentally retarded, attention deficit disorder, learning disabilities, and other behavior disorders. a high percentage who are on medication. And if you look into the eyes of those young children, normally males, you're looking at the future group who go into the prison system with amazing accuracy. You watch the progression from special education into middle school, and many of them will stop taking their medication because they don't like the way the medication makes them feel. And then they start medicating themselves with a drug of choice, which is normally marijuana or someone's prescription drug. And the system has already been sort of developed this taste, if you will, for some type of drug. And so now they become a substance abuser. Many then will start to behave in such a way that they're too large physically to be handled, so they move to the what they call the alternative education system. The alternative education system is the first step toward juvenile incarceration. Most kids who go into the alternative system never make it back to regular school. Then you'll find in progression, they will start appearing as status offenders. And many of you social workers and DHHR, they start appearing on your radar screen. They're incorrigible, they're runaways, people taking out petitions for them. And so now they're status offenders. And many of them, basically, with the efforts that we try to apply, they still don't make much change in behavior. And then they adjudicate delinquent in the juvenile justice system. And then some will move in and out of detention. Thousands will basically go before a judge or probation officer back. It'll be, if you will, a revolving door. And they will do that for a number of years in many cases. And then when they turn 18, everybody is frustrated and angry. The judge is tired of looking at them. The prosecutor attorney is tired of seeing them. The police officer is tired of arresting them. And many will go right into the adult prison population. And many people in our nation and in this state are not even aware of what has taken place. And I predict it will bankrupt this country. And I predict that this state is headed toward bankruptcy over the next 5 to 15 years if something dramatic does not happen. And we've been saying this for a number of years, but now the data and the numbers are starting to come in for anybody who will take a look at them, and I'll share some of those with you later. We got an incredible pathology, and I hear very little being postulated from the national level, from the state, regional, local level to really deal with the pathology that we face in this country and in our own state in particular. Let me throw some numbers out at you. You go get the statistic, you can check them for yourself. Right now in the state of West Virginia, we have approaching 6,000 people in the adult correction system. The problem is we only have beds to house about 4,200 roughly. So for the last several years, every prison bed in the state of West Virginia has been occupied. And there has been a serious overcrowding in our regional jail system around the state. And there's been anywhere between 1,214 convicted felons that could not be moved out of the regional jail system because there was no room in West Virginia's jailhouse in the penitentiary. So these people have been denied opportunities of education and counseling and so forth that one should be afforded while they're incarcerated because they never make it to the penitentiary. It's been to the Supreme Court. This whole problem, there was a report that was published at the request of the West Virginia State Supreme Court called the Long-Term Plan to Reduce the Overcrowding in West Virginia's Prison Population. It was issued back in 2002. It never was implemented, and absolutely nothing has been done about it. And the problem still exists. And right now, there is discussion about the idea of having to build another prison to deal with West Virginia's prison population overcrowdingness. I started following this matter back in about 2000 when a good friend of mine, Mr. Otis Cox Jr., was the Secretary of Military Affairs and Public Safety, and he had brought in George Washington University, and they've been coming in every year, and every year they come in and do a calculation and tell us, you guys are right on track. Your prison population is continuing to increase, yet there's been almost nothing done about it. Few West Virginians realize that the Department of Corrections has a budget of about $172 million to incarcerate those individuals. The Regional Jail Authority has a budget of $80 million, and Juvenile Justice has a budget of about $35 million. That's a lot of dollars. And all we get out of it is we get the fact that we get to incarcerate these people for some period of time. And the problem is that the politicians, as well-meaning as they may have been, they convinced us that they could keep us safe, and we believed it. And they convinced us we will keep you safe because we'll lock up all the bad people. What they didn't tell us is that most of the bad people they lock up, they were released back to us in a few years, no better educated, no better skilled, and no better equipped to negotiate themselves in a free society. And what they didn't tell us is that every time we would then send you, the taxpayer, an invoice of $24,000 a year for each person we incarcerate. No one explained the fine print. It's the fine print that will bankrupt you because this is a reoccurring cost, and you create what I call a system that retreads itself. And so, as I said earlier, most of the offenders have children. Their children are the most likely to end up incarcerated, most likely to be adjudicated delinquent, most likely to give birth out of wedlock if they're female, or to father a child if they are a male, more likely to be in the social welfare system at some point. See, if you were to look at the children that were the children of incarcerated individuals, you find that they make up a significant number of the children that we provide social welfare benefits to in terms of TANF and Age of Families with Dependent Children and CHIPS and these other programs. Am I making any kind of sense at all? Do you see the direct nexus? There is a direct nexus between the problem of youth and the expense of the social welfare system and the prison industrial complex. Every time we lock someone up, we're locking up normally someone's mother or someone's father. So left behind is a fatherless or a motherless child, a child whose spirit is broken, a child who's much more likely to need some type of mental or behavior health care, a child who's more than likely to be a problem in the school and to have difficulties academically. Therefore, a child who is more likely than a child who does not have an incarcerated parent to be poor. And so the cycle of poverty continues. Are you following what I'm saying? I want you to follow this because this is so important, because most West Virginians never look at the jailhouse and the prison to see that we have to take a look at this. Not compromise the public safety, not put people out on the street that are going to hurt and going to harm us, but we must understand that it's simplified this very, very juvenile approach to solving the pathology of our community. It is failing, and it will bankrupt this state, and it will bankrupt this country, and it will leave our communities decimated. And here's what the problem is. And let me nail it down in West Virginia. But before I do that, let me look at it nationally. This great debate over illegal immigration, there was one great profound statement made by the president, and he said it out loud. Most people just didn't listen. The president said these individuals who are here, many of them illegally, they will take jobs that many Americans will not take. Did anyone remember that statement? That was absolutely profound. And what he was saying is we are driven by this service economy that requires a lot of unskilled but hard-working labor, and we don't have enough people who are willing to take these jobs. But he didn't say anything about the 2.2 million people that are incarcerated, 700,000 which are released every year from the prison system to make room for 700,000 more. But he's saying we have a labor shortage. We have a labor problem. And without the immigrants coming in, then the Florida citrus growers and many of the farmers and many of the places where there is a great service economy couldn't fill the jobs. So now becomes this idea of, do we have the labor, and do we have the labor that's willing to take the job? Let me tell you why this is so critical for West Virginia. And we aren't talking about it. The data that I could get, the latest data went back to about 1995, and from 1995 to 2004, at the date of the report, there were 18,000 individuals, 18,000 who had been committed to the West Virginia Department of Corrections as convicted felons. 18,000. Now that doesn't include those individuals who were convicted felons during that period of time and who received some type of probation. Therefore, they never went into the prison system. So it's thousands. Those individuals all are marginalized because there are many employers that will not hire them because of their felony status. And there are many jobs that they're no longer eligible for. So they are excluded from much of the labor force. Are you following what I'm saying? Now, when you add the fact that you have that number that's been excluded from the labor market, not totally, but they don't have total participation because of the employers who say, we won't hire someone with a convicted felon, because of many government jobs that says, by law, we will not allow them to be employed. Therefore, they are permanently marginalized in this economy, and their children, even if they get out of prison, are more likely to be in poverty and more likely to need some type of social welfare support. That's just one nail. When you look at the second one, and that is the baby boomers in this country, those between 50 and 60, 46 to 56, 78 million of them nationally, there was a report on PBS on yesterday, 78 million of them nationally, high percentage in West Virginia because we are the oldest state in the union. Those baby boomers, those between that age range, 50 to 60, they will retire in unprecedented numbers over the next 5 to 15 years. As a matter of fact, the state of West Virginia, Department of Transportation, Highway Division, on the radio the other day saying we can't fill our jobs. Our engineers are getting ready to retire, and we can't fill these positions, and we cannot compete with other engineering companies because we can't pay the salaries. Here's what happens. When the baby boomers retire, they leave the workforce, the best educated, best trained, best skilled, maybe hardest working workforce that the country has ever produced. They leave the workforce. You don't have people entering the workforce with the education level, with the skill level, and with the passion for work that those who are leaving have. Are you connecting the dots? But there's another problem. When they leave the workforce, their income does what? It drops. Therefore, their taxable income goes down. Therefore, the tax base shrinks considerably. That's what this gambling thing is all about. You know, I'm a pastor. I'm definitely opposed to gambling because I don't think it creates anything of any value to the society. It's a transfer of wealth, in many cases, from those who are least able to pay it into the hands of those who least need it. And it's a regressive form of taxation, and in my opinion, it's a political coward's way of taxing the people because gambling is nothing more than a form of taxation. It's a way to raise revenue for the government without telling the people we need to raise your taxes. But that's what all this conversation is about, gambling. Those who look at the finances, they know that the tax revenues are going to shrink, and they're trying to figure out how we're going to make up for that budget deficit. But I'm talking workforce. I'm talking about prison people. I'm talking about people who are retiring. The other problem is that, did you read the article in the paper a few months ago where this think tank pointed out the fact that West Virginia is the only state in the union with 0% immigration of minorities? 0% immigration of minorities. Now, we may have a river that divides our beautiful city, but there aren't people jumping out of boats at night to come here to work. So now our labor force continues to shrink because of those in the prison system, those marginalized because they're felons, those who are retiring because of retirement age, 0% immigration that's coming into the state, and a high out-migration rate that nobody talks about. So a lot of the fairest and the brightest who pack up their suitcases and their trunks and they throw them in their parents' SUVs and they head up the I-79 corridor going to WVU or head at that 64 going to Marshall, they spend 4 years there, they don't fully unpack, but they just keep moving. We lose the best, we lose the brightest. Why? Because they have the skills, the abilities, the education, and they have the mobility to move somewhere else. This neglect of the poor will be the peril of this state and this nation. But this state in particular will feel it because the poor are those who are the less mobile, they have the less skills to make them competitive, and they really don't have anywhere to go. So they remain when the fairest and the brightest have left, when the elderly have retired and moved to Florida, and when their parents go into the incarceration system. This is serious business. And I take to task the economists. I was in several years ago, I haven't been back since. I was in the West Virginia Economic Outlook Summit. They bring it to this city every year. And I asked one of the preeminent economists in this state a simple question. And he was talking about the workforce. And I asked him the question, have you taken into account those individuals who are in the prison system? And he said no. And I said, if he hasn't done that, no confidence in the numbers he's talking about, because he's really missing the big point. But not only is it those who are incarcerated, those who are retiring, those who leave through outmigration, the fact we don't have any immigration, we're not graduating enough young people with the skills to fill the jobs that are going to be open. We got over a third of West Virginia high school graduates, West Virginia high schools students who should graduate don't graduate from high school. Did you hear me? About a third of our children are not graduating from high school. But the scary proposition is this, is that that group that goes to college, that do graduate from high school, over a third of them have to go into what they call developmental courses because they don't have the educational background to take a college level course. If you look at all of the educational indicators, we're not doing as well as we need to do to be competitive in a global economy. We can compare ourselves with someone else that's mediocre, and we can say, well, we're doing just as good as they're doing. But the problem is mediocrity doesn't get it in a very highly competitive economy. We got a serious crisis, and we see it. Now, I want to show you this direct link because this prison thing, it creates what I've defined as a social pathology of unprecedented proportion. And I don't hear anybody talking about it. And let me explain to you what I mean. In the state of West Virginia, well, nationally, 70% of all black children are born out of wedlock. 70%. And we might as well tell the truth because only the truth can set us free, and ignoring it doesn't help us at all. 70% are born out of wedlock. And about 35 of all white children born out of wedlock, and Caucasian has the fastest out of wedlock birth rate in the country. In West Virginia, 77% of all black children born out of wedlock, 7 percentage point above the national average, and 35% of all Caucasian children are born out of wedlock. And the Caucasian out of wedlock birth rate went from 29% in 2000 to 35% in 2005. So what's happening? The foundation is cracking, and the foundation is the family. In the African American community, in these urban metroplexes, there basically is no nuclear family of a husband and a wife. It doesn't exist. In Charleston, 80% of all children are born out of wedlock, and I would assume that probably the same is the case in Huntington. You see in this weakening of this family, and if you could pull the data out socioeconomically, you would see that a large percent of low socioeconomic Caucasian children are born out of wedlock, much higher than the 35% rate for the total group. Does that make sense? And if I don't make sense, tell me it's not making sense, because I want to make sense. I don't want the guys in the white coat to come in here and get me because I'm not making sense. What I'm trying to get everyone to realize is that we have an unprecedented breakdown in the basic fundamental building block institution of our society, and that's the family. And when the family breaks down the way it's breaking down in this country and in this nation, we don't have a hook to hang anything on, and we don't have a lever to move anything, and we don't have the system to pass on what's really important to us. Therefore, the problem of the breakdown of the family, where does that pathology manifest itself? In the public school system. That's where it shows up. So the public school system becomes these social diagnostic centers. And we find out the kids are depressed there, and we find out they have emotional problems there, and we find out that some have been abused there, and others have been neglected there. We find a whole lot of things out in the public schools. And so I submit to people, and some will take me to task on this point. I believe, first of all, I don't think the public schools were nearly as good as we thought they were, and I think right now they're better than they've ever been before. And I'm going to tell you why. When the family is strong, When children have resiliency, when they have emotional stability, when they feel cared for, when they feel nurtured, when they know that someone expects me to do well, when they feel support from nuclear, extended family, and community, they go to school and they learn. And the school basically only has to teach. Now the school has to feed, they have to teach, they got to medicate, they got to counsel, they got to try to be surrogate parents for so many children. And so they are bogged down with so many things, they spend a lot of time doing non-academic things. And we say, well, why can't we fix this? We can't fix it because it is unfixable at the schoolhouse alone. It takes more than what teachers can do to fix these children, to give them the resiliency, the emotional stability, the confidence, the sense of hope that they need to really apply themselves academically. We got computers, and we have calculators, and we have robots, and we have Title I teachers, and we got all, and people still can't read. It has to be more than the fact that there's something wrong with the teachers. And we as parents, as pastors, and as community people, we must be prepared to face that reality. So what I'm suggesting is the family is eroding, it is deteriorating like a cheap sweater. And much of what we're doing is doing very little to strengthen it. And what I'm saying is we got to come up with a whole new model of how we're going to provide services to a generation of young people who are fatherless in many cases, whose spirits are broken. How do we raise these children? How do we create a system to whereby we give support to single mothers, and it has to be more than just a welfare check and a medical card and a HUD voucher. But how does the community provide the type of support that these single mothers need to have the resiliency that they need to persevere, realizing that their lot in life in West Virginia may not change significantly, but they can have a vision for their children. They can have a vision for their children. And at some point, we've really got to be honest and face the truth that many mothers who are stuck in rural poverty in rural West Virginia, where the only employer is Kmart and Wendy's and McDonald's, and they have nowhere to go to move out of that situation, they may not improve significantly their socioeconomic plight. However, the cycle can be broken in the next generation if the mothers catch the vision, because there are people around them helping them to catch a vision that your children can have a better life than what you had. It's a whole new way of looking at things. This pathology is magnified. Let's go back to the prison system. When daddy goes to jail, the whole family is locked up to a certain degree, because now daddy got to call home. And when daddy calls home, it has to be collect. And daddy pays about $3 or $4 a minute. Those resources come out the family budget when the phone bill comes. When daddy goes to jail, you got to go see daddy. So those expenses to go see him while he's locked up. When daddy goes to jail, there has to be some money in his commissary account. All of these resources deplete the resources from the family, and therefore the family is in a worse socioeconomic situation than they were before. We have to understand this, because they're like strands that are strangling the life out of people. And we never see this nexus between these people locked up and the fact that they're locked up, and maybe they legitimately should be there because of the crime that they committed, but their lockup puts additional stress on the family, and many of those children suffer, and they're grieving the loss of their parent, just like they would have died. And in some cases, it's worse than death, because in the regional jail system, they're in and out, so they create havoc. They're always disrupting the family. Every time it almost settles into some rhythm as to how this family is going to work. These things has to be understood, because the children are always the most vulnerable, and they're the most impacted by these disruptions and this hope that is lifted and then this hope that is dashed. And so their spirit is broken, and so they go to school and they don't care. And they become behavioral problems, and they become disruptive. And in our system, we don't have no place to put them. the system in our society that may be the most broken. And let me qualify this because someone will run back and tell these people and they'll be mad at me. You know, they'll be angry. It's hard being a truth teller in this state. If you are a truth teller in this state, a lot of people will be angry at you because we don't talk about the real issues and we live with this wishful thinking. If we try harder and we work harder, it's all going to go away. Well, it's not from the lack of hard work in many cases. It's from the lack of the recognition of what the real issues are, what the real pressure points are, and how do we develop the right model so that our hard work results in some type of productive outcome. But I'm seriously concerned, and I give much of my awakening days trying to figure out a way to help with and work with our juvenile justice system. It's not anybody's fault. The problem with the juvenile justice system is that it is an antiquated model. It was developed about 115 years ago with noble intentions, and it served well for a number of years. Basically, the juvenile justice system was designed to say children are going to have certain indiscretions. And we don't want to label them as felons and as convicts if their crime was not a very serious thing. We want to give them a chance to mature and grow out of that and be productive citizens. The problem is that the society has changed. The juvenile justice system is still working pretty much from the same model of let's use the least restrictive measure without compromising public safety, but is a serious problem with it. Let me tell you what the problem with the juvenile justice system is. Any system in a free republic like ours, nothing in our society works without the vigilant inspection of the people. You leave any system to politicians and it will be messed up. No, I mean, it will get messed up. It will lose its original intent, it will lose its purpose and its direction, and it becomes something other than what it was intended to be by design. That's what's happened to the juvenile justice system. It's been left merely to the politicians. The difference between the juvenile justice system and the adult court system is the juvenile system is confidential. My 11th grade daughter, a few years, she wrote a scholarly paper on the benefit and the importance of a legal system where there's a trial by jury. It was marvelous. And her concluding statement was this right here, that without a trial where there's a jury of the peers of the defendant being in the courtroom, then the courtroom will become nothing more than a forum for lawyers to debate the technical concept of the law. That's pretty good for 11th grade, isn't it? Her point is that the jury forces the lawyers to make the law relevant. It forces the lawyers to talk about real life situations and not get in some ethereal, philosophical meandering about what this case meant and what that case meant, which lawyers can tend to do. Her point was it's only the jury that is there who ultimately is who they have to talk to. I thought that was powerful. In a courtroom, you're not talking to the judge. The judge is just the independent arbiter to make sure that all the court proceedings follow the law and that it is a fair, unbiased trial. It is the jury who you're talking to because they're the ones that will render the verdict. Now, with that concept from my daughter's paper in mind, in the juvenile court, there's no jury. There's no jury. The only representation that the public has in the juvenile court is the prosecuting attorney, who's supposed to represent the people. So there's no jury there. The judge is the arbiter, and he's also the jury. So the judge hears what evidence that is presented. The judge then makes the determination as to whether or not he will adjudicate the young person delinquent or not, and then the judge then passes the sentence. You know, that works well for efficiency. The problem with the process is this. The judge isn't accountable to anybody. In the adult court, everybody that gets arrested, their name go in the newspaper. It's public information. In the juvenile system, the juvenile's name is protected, and the court, nor the legal system, by federal law, cannot release their name. And in most cases, the newspaper will protect that even if they get it, they can legally print it, as they did in this city a few months ago when there was a murder. They printed the names of those juveniles. They can legally do that, but the court, nor the legal system, can release it. So the judge isn't accountable to the public for his daily deliberations in the juvenile court. Guess what? The prosecuting attorney isn't either. He's not accountable to the people the way he's accountable with the adult court system, nor are the police. Nobody's accountable to the public. So the public doesn't have a clue of what's taking place in the juvenile court system. They don't know which kids it is that's appearing. They don't know what crimes it is that they're committing. And some of them go away somewhere, and then they come back to us. And we don't know where they've been, and we don't know whatever they've received, because we, the people, have had no involvement. And I suggest that's the major problem. How many of you would believe me if I told you there are 7,000 juveniles in the state of West Virginia that appear before a probation officer or a judge every year? How many would believe that? Okay. How many of you would believe me if you live in Kanawha County if I told you that there are over 700 juveniles that appear before the probation officer and judge in Kanawha County every single year? How many would believe that? How many would believe me if I told you that many kids appear before the juvenile courts, weapon possession, discharge firearms, possession of drugs on their person, and still go home with their parents after the hearing? It happens in your city, and it happens in mine. Because we don't even have a juvenile system to deal with the volume of juveniles that come through it, because it wasn't designed to accommodate them. It was designed primarily to deal with kids who were incorrigible, who were runaways, property damage, little vandalism, and a little shoplifting. That's what the juvenile court was designed to handle, because 115 years ago, those were the major offenses that were committed by juveniles. But today, we have sexual abusers, and they're normally dealt with, don't get me wrong. But where there's this leniency often in the court, and for the life of me, I can't figure it out, it's with weapons possessions. You'd be amazed that a child, it's a federal law for a minor, it's a federal law for a minor to have the possession of a firearm, a concealed weapon. It's a violation of a federal law. The federal court seldom intervenes in juvenile matters. So what ends up happening is that it's handled locally, and for some reason, which I simply can't figure out, it's as if we don't think that it's more serious that a juvenile has a gun than when an adult has one. And so we would treat it often like it's not a serious matter, and we would send the kid home with their parents who cannot control them. That's why we're in the court. And the kid will often progress into the system. Now, I'm not suggesting that we just lock all these kids up. What I'm suggesting is we have to create the right model which has the type of sanctions that we need to have. And I went on record as saying any child who is arrested with possession of a firearm should be detained for a couple of days. Let's figure out what's going on. Why do you feel threatened? What's going on? You feel like you have to carry a firearm. And once we can conclude that we don't think that they're going to hurt anybody, then they should be placed on monitored home confinement so that we can make sure that we're pulling them away from the negative element, whatever it was, and we also can find out, will they listen to anyone? In our society, if a parent cannot control their child, there's only one other authority left that can do it, and it's the judge. The judge is the only other person in a community that can impose sanctions. And I tell parents all the time, when your children get to become teenagers, unless they allow you, you can't do anything with them. They have to allow you to give them instruction. They have to receive your verbal discipline. And if they don't, you got a serious problem on your hands. Because you'll be amazed, and you got an incorrigible child. You guys won't be amazed because you see it happen, because you don't know what to do with these kids when you get them. So you call somebody up on the phone, so we need y'all to counsel and work with this kid. And we're going to work with the parent. And you know it's probably not going to work, but it's worth a try. We got to do something. We can't just do nothing. And I'm not trying to be funny. I see this. I've been looking at this for 20 years, see. I work with the most dangerous children in this state for 20 years. And most of the kids that get killed, as the young man did the other day, a young person that we have touched somewhere along the thoroughfare of life. That's what we did a special memorial for him. I did 7 funerals in 1 year and went to 14. 12 kids killed near and around my church on the west side of Charleston, young adults. And what people don't understand is that most of the time when a young person is involved in a violent act, they're either in or coming through, or they just come out of the juvenile justice system. And we've been unable to put the right model together to correct the situation. Well, I spent quite a bit of time there because I'm really wanting people to understand that we are losing this battle, and we're losing it because of the breakdown in the family. That pathology manifests itself in the public school. If we don't rally around our public schools to support children and support teachers there, we lose. Because it has been proven by research that connection with school, academic success in school, is a major deterrent for a child progressing into juvenile delinquency and to crime. If a young boy has not learned how to read by the 3rd grade, guess what? He probably is not going to learn. Because if you talk to the real educators who really know what they're doing, and they'll tell you the truth, we don't really know how to teach people how to read. We don't know how to do it. We have certain skills and we have certain tools and certain strategies, but through some miracle in how the mind develops and it processes the verbal and the written word, people learn to put it all together. If it hadn't happened by the 3rd grade, we really start scratching our heads at that point, you see. And the 4th grade syndrome sets in because you learn how to read from grade K to 3. You read to learn from grade 4 for the rest of your life. And so if you haven't learned how to read from K to 3, you cannot now learn to read or read to learn. Therefore, your education becomes somewhat stunted and significantly restricted. And we run our own GED programs, and I love these kids to death. But they've been in the public school system for 12 years, and they still cannot read. They still cannot read on 3rd and 4th grade level. Some of my youth would never get a GED because I can't get them to the 9th grade. But if I can keep them engaged in the educational process to where they can get better skills, to where I can at least get them connected to some type of vocational trade, some type of skill that they can learn to do and function in the economy, then they can be a productive citizen and they can labor with their hands and not get caught into the illegal economy. Are you following me? This public education thing is going to get us. And we have become lazy as a society. And we're allowing a few people again, understand now, school board people, I love them dearly, but they are politicians, you know. That's right. Okay, they are politicians, you know. And so if we don't be vigilant and diligent to make the school system get as much out of it as we can, support it with after-school programs, support it with some enrichment programs, then we lose. Here's what I'm suggesting. Here's what my major thesis is. My major thesis is this, is that the family is in such disarray, it's in such shambles, that many of the families are incapable of providing the type of emotional and moral and intellectual support that those children need. We can condemn them, we can crucify them, we can say scathing things about them, all we want. But they can only do what they have the skills and the capacity to do. We have to work with them to try to help increase their skill and their capacity, but in the meantime, we have to do as much as we can to augment and to supplement for their children, because a child should not be penalized for being born into a home where the parents were not ready, were not able, or were not willing to help them, you see. So the whole community has to come together, and the one place that we can do it best is at the public schools. It's the one place, because we can't agree on religion. Definitely we can't agree on that. So we're definitely not going to do it at the church. But we can agree that every child needs to know how to read and to write and communicate. And we can agree that every child needs a marketable skill so they can labor with their own hands, their mind, provide for their own needs, have their dignity affirmed and reinforced. We can agree on that. So what I'm saying, the strategy is do all these things we can to help the parents. But we've got to focus with greater intensity and laser precision at pulling together the business community who've been pretty much AWOL. Pretty much AWOL when it really comes to doing something about education. Giving a little bit of lip service to it, but not much more than that. And they are the major beneficiaries, and they're the major group that is dependent on an educated workforce. Yet they really never come and say, look, we want to be a full-fledged partner at the table. We're going to bring our management and our business skills, and we're going to see if we can help improve the public education system. And if we don't do that, then we lose. It's the place that we can come. And we can decide here is where our kids come, the majority, particularly in West Virginia, because our state is so poor. And here's where life is making up its mind in our state. And if we can agree to come there and do something really good together with mentoring programs, with tutoring programs, with support programs for young people, to bring these resources there so that every child gets up in the morning excited about going to school. Excited about going to school because they know that I'm going to be loved and nurtured and affirmed there, and they're going to be people coming from the community who know me by name, reminding me that I'm special, investing their time in me. And I believe that we can reach these kids and we can break this cycle. If we don't do it, we lose. We lose. I close with this. I want to leave the time for a couple of questions. I got a good ear. I listen very, very closely. If you remember, after the election, when the decision was made that Rumsfeld had to go, said, bring in Mr. Gates. He's testifying before the Senate confirmation hearing, and they asked him a question. They said, Mr. Gates, do you believe that we are winning the war in Iraq? Does anybody remember what he said? Does anyone remember? I'll tell you what he said. Categorically, emphatically, and dogmatically, he said, no, we're not winning. 2 days later, they asked the President of the United States the same question. But you remember what he said, don't you? No, and I like President Bush. I mean, I'm respectful toward the leadership. What did the President say? Yep. That's not what he said. He said, we're not winning and we're not losing. Remember that? Yeah. Now, why the different answers? You got to read between the white spaces, and you got to listen between the pauses. The reason Gates said what he said is because you fired the last guy. You wouldn't have fired him if we would have been winning, see. He could say it. He could say we're losing because you fired the last person, the president did. You're bringing somebody else in, and when you're bringing me in, you're ready to change something. The reason the president couldn't say it at the time is because he had not gone through the big report that Baker and them put together. Remember? The Baker team, they went over there and they put this big report together. Well, the president hadn't gone through that whole report. They hadn't really put their plan together. So if the president would have said, we're losing, they would say, well, what are we going to do about it? Because before then, his plan had been, let's stay the course. He couldn't say we were losing. He couldn't say we were winning because he had just fired his Secretary of Defense. So he left it in this gray area to give himself some time to come up with a new plan. And so he comes up with a new plan that we got to have a surge. Let me tell you what the surge is. This is all it is. I agree. I really agree that if we got a chance to win, we got to do something different. Because what we were doing wasn't working. And it was Deming that said that you have a perfectly designed system to produce what you're getting. And I added to that, if you like what you're getting, don't change anything. But if you don't like it, you better change something. I think it was Einstein that said the first sign of insanity is do the same thing, expecting a different result. So here's what the surge is. You know what the surge is? It's not some complicated, sophisticated military strategy. It is, we got to put soldiers on the ground,